I'm going to talk today about the geography students here in the Mary Immaculate College and how they applied the skills that they learned in Mount St. Lawrence to other projects. And then Grania here is going to be talking about the oral interviews that we did as well. So we're in the geography department here, we introduced the students to very different types of assignments and different types of methodologies. And one of that was what I suppose can be termed dark tourism. So it was an opportunity. The group of students that I'm going to talk about are the current, or the hopefully they'll be sitting their exams in a few weeks' time. So the current fourth years, and they had already had experience in Mount St. Lawrence doing the recording and surveying of the graveyard there. So to take the knowledge and the skills that they learned in Mount St. Lawrence a step further, the module that they were doing then in the autumn semester of 2013 was the tourism and heritage management. And as part of that module, there was always a field trip, and usually to Donegal. So what Dr. Helene Bradley Davis, the the head of the module, wanted to ensure that the students could bring the skills that they had acquired with the Mount St. Lawrence project and tunnel those skills into heritage and conservation management and how they could develop those skills. So it was an opportunity for the different, teaching for learning, and garners different methodologies of incorporating the different types of learning skills. And fieldwork is the ideal opportunity, and of course geography, fieldwork is central to the fieldwork. So the concepts they learned in Mount St. Lawrence, such as the mapping, the recording, the iconography, we brought that one step further and applied it to a conservation and heritage management programme, or potential one, and that was going to be the one that we looked at in the Old Glenties Graveyard. So here's just an example. I just want to, Marge spoke yesterday a little bit about the difference between the geography students and the history students. These are the geography students. They come prepared. They have the rain jackets. They have the Wellingtons. They have had 4 years of geography, so they know what a field trip entails. And it's nearly always, 99% of the time, involves rain and mucky fields. And so they come prepared, and we have our special clipboards with the plastic tops to them, so that even if it's raining, there's no excuse. They can't get out of it. They can still write the results. So this is just an example then of the enthusiasm that our students bring to it. And I must say they do. They are fantastic. When you see, going to a graveyard for your field trip for an assignment, yet again, Mount St. Lawrence was bad enough, and now here they are. They're going to the Old Glenties Graveyard in Glenties and Donegal. And this was a different, the previous trips hadn't involved, to Donegal hadn't involved a graveyard. But because of the skills they had learned at Mount St. Lawrence, we thought that it was good that they might apply those skills to Donegal and look at conservation and heritage management. Also, Mount St. Lawrence was obviously an urban graveyard, and here we would have an example of a rural-based graveyard that no longer really, I think, in use. So this is just a map in relation to the town of Glenties and the trip by bus then out to the Old Glenties Graveyard, passing the modern graveyard. So I think their hearts sunk when they went past the nice organised graveyard and then pulled up into the higgledy-piggledy, lovely old graveyard of the Old Glenties. So that's just a photo. And again, as you can see, the photo is so dark because it was a dark, wet day. So this just shows you the kind of conditions that we put the students through. So the different group split the students up into different groups. One of the groups was to do exactly more or less what they had done in the Mount St. Lawrence. In other words, get the masking tape and the marker and mark the graves, and do a survey of the graves. In other words, prepare the site for the marking and for the different surveys. Another group then was to record the iconography, which of course, as you can imagine, in a rural setting like this, would also bring up some beautiful iconography in it. And also then another group look at the conservation and heritage management issues. And then finally a condition report on the graveyard itself, which I'll go through. So these are the group that had to do the actual site layout plan, and so they were involved in measuring out the graveyard, getting the old reliable geographical tools of the trundle wheel and the compass and the GPS equipment and the measuring tape and all that. So and as you can see, it also gave them another kind of a contrast to Mount St. Lawrence, in that there was very definite slopes in this graveyard and noticeable dips, as one of the students commented. It was almost like a Teletubby land, you know, the little humps and bumps in the graveyard, so that they had to measure that out, and also maybe come up with some ideas as to why maybe there are such hollows in the graveyard. And I think that was one of the things that they realised very early on, was how old the graveyard was, and that it was like unlike Mount St. Lawrence, which was post-famine, this was also included the famine and pre-famine period, so that a lot of them quite rightly suggested that a lot of the hollows would be famine burials. So this is some of the reports that the students, the group on iconography and writing had to fill out this report. And so they looked at things like the style of writing and the symbols that would be on the headstones, whether it's nature or religious, or the different kinds of even the edgings on it. And so they were looking for the very first kind of things they looked at was the basic dimensions of the headstone, date of the earliest burial, and so that they could maybe identify patterns associated with certain time periods of iconography and style of decoration. So you can see sunlight was not going to work on a day like that we had up in that graveyard. So literally we had the torches out, looking at the writing, and again that it was amazing, the enthusiasm of the students. You wouldn't think that, you know, they're crawling down on the ground and getting up on some of the headstones, looking right in at the writing, and not leaving it until they could find, determined to find a date or a name. We also wanted them to identify the different types of headstones and the unusual type of headstones and shapes and styles to them, and the style of writing. And I think especially in this graveyard, there's such a mixture of the styles of writing, because you had the influence of the Irish language as well on some of the headstones, as well as some of the kind of what would be vernacular to that area, local to that area. So this is just an example of some of the iconography of this graveyard that the students identified. Again, then they looked at the different symbols, whether it's religious or nature or mortality, and some of them were even say, "Oh, I recognise that from Mount St. Lawrence," or, "You know, that I can recognise this," or even like, "God, I recognise this from my own home area." So these are again some of the symbols and the iconography, the cherubs and all the different styles that were in this graveyard. Then this was the other element, or the other group. One of the other groups was recording a management plan, so a historic graveyard and management plan. So they had to give the basic site description, site history, graveyard elements, maintenance. What do they think of the conservation methods in place, or the maintenance of the graveyard? Boundary issues, descriptions, conditions, and action. So you can see that some of the site, the boundaries itself were in poor condition. Access there was a main gate as well, but this is just to show that there was alternative modes of access to the graveyard as well. But it gave the students a nice contrast again with the Mount St. Lawrence, which, you know, the boundaries were so in place in Mount St. Lawrence, was the issues here with boundaries and access. They also looked at ironwork, and at stone memorials, given the description, but also the condition that they were in and the need for conservation. If you were here for Helene's talk earlier on the mapping that we did with Mount St. Lawrence, based on the condition of the grave and the English heritage scaling of 1 to 4 of the condition of the grave, so that the students would have had a theoretical background in this from the classroom, and then that they could apply this and see it in the field, so which was fantastic, because I think it makes it more real to them that, also, this is what number 1 in the English heritage means, or this is what number 4 is, that they can classify it and identify it themselves in the field. So you can see issues of subsidence and ironwork, things that the students themselves could identify, the potential threats with vegetation and all like that. So they had to describe it under different headings then, to do with the interior of the graveyard as well as the boundary issues, then the pathways, masonry structures, conservation issues, and it was interesting to hear what they had to say about conservation issues and what the ideas they had about maybe preservation methods, and also then to classify it under different management, short-term, long-term and medium-term. So the immediate dangers that could they identify, and long-term ideas then. It was also one of the interior structures that was in the this graveyard, which makes it kind of well, not unique, but it is unusual. There was 2 churches or mortuary chapels. I don't know how you would describe them. So that the students then would again had to come up with suggestions for use and function, and also methods of conservation. So you can see that it's very much kept in good condition. You can see the interior. Again, that this is the actual condition report then on the actual physical graveyard itself. So things like the headstones, but also, so this is an example of the students doing this condition report, looking at the physical aspect of the graveyard itself. And also, can they identify local headstones, like this one here that students pointed out, that is inlaid with seashells, so which was a beautiful example of the local influence in the area. So they looked at structural condition of the actual headstones, as well as the physical, the graveyard itself. And these are just examples of some of the local monuments. So some of the questions that we wanted the students to think about as they were doing these reports, some of could they identify some patterns and processes that in the graveyard? For example, we identified the fact that there was some of the headstones were orientated in a different direction to the others, so trusting in the normal direction. So could they come up with suggestions for that? And it really irked them that they couldn't think of a reason. And so in the end, we kind of had to hint around it, that the fact that the people whose graves aren't in the usual orientation are actually from the outside, and could they maybe think of a reason then? So then when we suggested that maybe they're from a different area, and specifically from the islands, could they think of it then? So then it clicked with them that the graveyards are actually facing the direction of the islands that these people came from. So it was a lovely way, again, of opening up the students' eyes to trying to identify patterns in a graveyard, and to look and see for differences. Also, we wanted them to realise about the evolution of the historic landscape of the graveyard as well, that how it has evolved throughout time, that it wasn't a static graveyard. And I'll show you an example of how they identified that in a minute. And also then, could they identify socio-economic differences, that there was this very obvious difference between some of the headstone markers, some plain simple headstone markers just with no inscriptions, and then the big monumental works, but also where these were placed in the graveyard as well. And also as the famine markers as well, or the section of the graveyard that is suggested for famine burials. So to look for the different evolution of the graveyard, we gave them the cartographic evidence. So they were supplied with these maps, and that they were to look at them and see for themselves how it has evolved. So we see on the left-hand side we have the first edition 6-inch map, Ordnance Survey map from roughly the early 1840s that shows the graveyard and the lawn path into the graveyard. And the graveyard actually started where those two church buildings were. So the graveyard was behind those two church buildings. And then to compare the later 25-inch edition of the Ordnance Survey, that the students could easily see that the graveyard had expanded and now started at the actual roadway and included the area up to the churches and then obviously beyond, so that they could distinguish between the older headstones in the graveyard, which were located obviously at the back, to the new ones or the newer ones post 1900, you could say, at the front, so they could identify those. So these are some of the just photos of the students having so much fun in the graveyard, happy, smiling students, busy at work, busy identifying all these patterns and processes, and which is what we like to see, these happy students. And it's just, we were helped by Dr. Joseph Gallagher, who was the Heritage Officer with Donegal County Council, and it was a real example of the students working with a Heritage Officer, putting in place the skills or the theories that they had learned in the classroom, and being capacity building and being empowered so that they themselves, whether it's in a professional capacity or maybe as a volunteer, we heard about Ballyhoward this morning with Amanda and Colm talking about the amount of volunteers, nearly 300 volunteers that they have with their graveyards. So hopefully that these students themselves will be empowered from this module and go and be, whether it's professional, as I say, or as a volunteer, and help map and conserve these graveyards into the future. So thank you very much.
Can I just show just a few images? Sorry. Just to tail end, sorry, now I know it's late in the evening and we have the graveyard shift, pardon the pun, but I just want to show a few images of, as well, I was on this project in Donegal as well, in Glenties, but from the Mount St. Lawrence, collecting the database, we did do a number of oral history interviews with, I interviewed 11 people, and just to give you just a quick glimpse, there are only 5 images of the types of things that we found. So basically, I suppose the importance of the oral history interviews was also to document kind of past times of death and burial. So where did the coffin come in Limerick as it reached the Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery? What type of party did they have? Did they have one at all? Was it horses and carriages? So when you do oral history interviews with the people of Limerick, we found out a lot of things. Mostly a lot of them brought in prices of the funerals. They varied in price. What type of ceremony they had? Was it family only? Did they wear black for a month afterwards? Did they not listen to the radio? All these kind of things emerged. So I'm just going to show you just a few images here. These are just some lovely images we found from our interviewees. And here we have some images. This is in New Street in Limerick. And I also put the newest photo next to it actually as well. So you can see the difference in the two buildings. Other accounts that we found was the say funeral furnitures. How much did they pay for? Here we see here the purple coffin pad, which was £40 at the time. This is in 1963. So there's a lot of things, as well as just traditions of funerals. We found a lot of documents that were very interesting and they're worth having as well. Other things that we found were just old medals. These were old medals and dating, some of them 1940s as well. So we found a lot of information like this from our respondents. One of the most interesting thing I found from one of my respondents was nothing to do with death and burial to a certain extent in Limerick, but he bought a book in Oxfam in Limerick, and it was a religious book, and he said he bought it about 30 years ago, and he said this slip of paper fell out at one stage. And I think the most interesting thing is you look at the first name and then look at the person who signed it. So you find these very interesting artifacts just from the oral history interviews that did pop out, and it was a great experience. I know Maura and Helene has covered, and Ursula, how tough it was out in the graveyard, hail, rain and snow, but you know, the students were very good and they did the job in immense time, especially when it was raining. So just to kind of finalise as well as what Marie was saying in Donegal, they did find a few graves that were facing the sea, let's say, and the students turned around and they started Googling the 1901-1911 census. So you're going to see how technology has improved their understanding of the landscape and how they actually investigated the landscape on site. And they discovered the occupation of the people buried in the Donegal cemetery, and that then led them to believe that it wasn't islanders. I think in the end they discovered that they weren't islanders, and still unknown why those graves were facing the different way. Yeah. So that's kind of just two student experiences of our dealings with graveyards and Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery. So thanks to Marie as well for talking there beforehand.